Welcome back to the deep dive. We're jumping straight into something pretty specific today. It's a very focused area of devotional teaching, really zeroing in on this concept called travailing deeply in prayer for souls.
Yes. Our source material for this deep dive comes from Rhapsody of Realities by Pastor Chris. Quite intense.
It is. And our sources, they're very particular, giving detailed instructions about, well, a certain kind of intercession. It's not just, pray more. It's describing this method of really intense, almost a strenuous spiritual effort. So our mission today is to dive into that. We need to unpack what's behind it, what the actual travail looks like in practice, and, what results are promised.
And I think right off the bat, the key thing to get is why this intensity is seen as necessary. It's not just arbitrary effort. It starts with this core belief, this premise that people who don't believe aren't just unaware, they're actively hindered spiritually speaking.
Hindered how?
Well, the source material points directly to Scripture, specifically 2 Corinthians 4, verses 3 and 4. It says, the God of this world have blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ should shine unto them.
Okay, wow. So blinded. That sets the stakes incredibly high right from the start. We're not talking about simple indifference then, are we? It's presented as an active spiritual obstruction
Right.
by, well, an external force.
Exactly. And that framing dictates everything that follows. If you believe there's an actual blinding happening, a kind of spiritual interference.
Then logically, a sort of casual, half-hearted prayer isn't going to cut it, is it? It wouldn't be enough to break through that kind of darkness.
Precisely. It demands a response that's proportionate to the problem. The source basically frames it as a spiritual crisis. Souls are seen as unable to perceive truth because something specific is blocking their view. So the person praying, the intercessor, has to engage in an effort strong enough to, well, dismantle that obstruction.
Okay, right. So let's unpack that effort. If it needs to be so intense, so demanding, where does someone find the drive for that? This deep travail, it sounds spiritually, maybe even emotionally exhausting. The motivation must be incredibly powerful.
It has to be. And the source is very, very clear on this. The absolute fuel for this kind of intense prayer is understanding what it calls the worth of a soul.
The worth of a soul.
Yes. That's the foundation. It's non-negotiable. The idea is, if you don't truly grasp and internalize this incredible value, you simply won't muster the necessary energy or persistence.
How does the source help someone grasp that value? It sounds quite abstract.
It uses a really potent analogy, one Jesus himself gave in Matthew 13, verses 45 and 46. It's the story of a merchant searching for fine pearls. And when he finds this one pearl of great price.
Ah, I know this one.
Right. What does he do? He goes and sells everything he has to buy that single pearl.
Everything. Wow. Okay. That is a powerful metric. So the analogy is saying a single soul is worth, well, everything a person owns, their security, their wealth, possessions.
That's the implication. Yeah. It's meant to force a radical shift in perspective. The cost of getting that pearl was total. Complete self-emptying, you could say. Yeah. And the source argues, look, if that's a value God places on a soul, a value that requires you to give up everything, comfort, security, self-interest, then the effort you put into praying for that soul has to match.
It has to correspond to that same level of sacrifice, it's a total commitment.
Exactly. That's the connection. It explains the high cost, the spiritual labor involved. Understanding that almost infinite value is what supposedly compels the person praying to, as the source puts it, groan in prayer and keep pressing until a soul is won and established in the kingdom.
That phrase, keep pressing until, suggests real persistence.
Oh, absolutely. And it's crucial to stress the purity of the motivation here. The source really hammers this point home. This deep prayer, this travail, it has to be driven by the love of Christ and what's called the Spirit's burden. It's purely about the other person's eternal state.
Right. It explicitly says it's not for personal gain. I remember seeing that. Like, this isn't the method for crying in prayer over someone you want to marry or do business with. That's a direct quote, isn't it?
It is. Very specific. It keeps the focus entirely external. It's about their salvation, their spiritual transformation, nothing else.
That distinction's important. It takes it out of the realm of, like, prayer as a transaction and puts it into radical, selfless intercession.
Totally. It's all focused outward.
Okay, so if the motivation is that absolute, the infinite value of the soul, it demands an equally absolute level of effort. Which brings us to the how. What does this deep travail actually look like? This is where the language gets quite specific, almost specialized.
Yeah, it moves from the why to the what, and it gives these really evocative behavioral descriptions. It talks about moving into deep travail, and that includes things like wailing in the Spirit.
Okay, wailing in the Spirit, groaning in prayer. Let's unpack that a bit. Is this literal, like audible crying out, physical groaning? Or is it more a description of the internal intensity, that feeling of spiritual pressure and, well, deep anguish?
It's generally understood as potentially both, but the real emphasis seems to be on the internal state, the intensity. Groaning in prayer, for example, suggests this profound exertion that goes beyond normal words, like a desperate, fervent wrestling.
Almost like the spiritual version of intense physical labor.
That's a good way to put it, where the effort is so immense, it might actually cause a physical reaction. Tears, maybe deep sighs, even audible cries. It implies a struggle, real exertion that takes stamina.
It does sound incredibly draining, and the instruction is to keep at it, pressing until a soul is won. That could mean days, weeks, maybe longer. Does the source give any advice on how someone sustains that level of intensity, that wailing or groaning, without completely burning out?
Well, the key is, in that phrase, until there's a release. That's the guidance. The teaching isn't that you maintain the outward physical manifestation forever. It's about sustaining the spiritual pressure until you reach a distinct point, a sense of completion. That's the release.
Ah, okay, so the release is like a spiritual signal.
Kind of like a spiritual finish line.
Yeah.
It's described as the moment the intercessor feels that burden lift, indicating the spiritual goal has been met, at least in prayer. The fight feels won. That's really the mechanism to prevent burnout. The effort is intense, but it's limited by achieving that spiritual result, not just by the clock.
That reframes it quite a bit. It's not vague, endless effort. It's more like a focused, deep work sprint toward a specific spiritual goal. And that connects to something else I saw, the planning aspect. It suggests this isn't accidental praying. You're meant to decide beforehand, okay, today's prayer is deep travail.
Exactly. It makes it deliberate.
Yeah.
A conscious choice of method. You're treating that prayer time as a specific spiritual assignment, intentionally dialing up the intensity. Like you're entering the spiritual arena for a particular battle.
Right. So if it's a battle, the motivation's clear, the soul's value, the effort's defined, travail until release.
Yeah.
But what about the targets? Once someone is in that state of deep travail, what are they actually aiming at? It can't just be a general feeling. The prayer needs direction, surely.
Oh, absolutely. It has to be directed. And the source outlines very specific declarations that should be made with passion. The whole focus of the intercession is to make sure that the light of the glorious gospel of Christ shines in the hearts of those who don't yet believe.
So it's directly confronting that blinding issue we talked about at the start.
Precisely. The prayer isn't just asking God to save someone in a general way. It's actively pushing back against the specific things the source claims are stopping the message from getting through.
What are those specific things?
The targets are named. The spiritual obstacles, stopping the gospel from taking root. The prayer aims to prevail over what the source explicitly calls darkness, religion, and deception.
Darkness, religion, and deception. Okay, those three.
Yes, those are singled out as the primary blinding forces keeping hearts closed. So it becomes this proactive battle plan. The person praying needs to be declaring things like every resistance in their hearts to the gospel is broken,
Yeah.
and that they are delivered from Satan's dominion.
And that their hearts are open.
Crucially, yes, declaring that their hearts are open to receive it for their salvation. It's presented as a kind of legal, declarative act in the spiritual realm, confronting the constraints, holding the person captive.
It sounds like the core idea of this deep travail is applying focused spiritual force to dismantle these unseen barriers, clearing the path. So when the gospel is presented, the person is actually receptive on a spiritual level?
That's essentially the goal, yes. Softening the ground, removing the obstacles, making the spiritual environment ready for transformation. And the intensity of the travail is seen as necessary because the spiritual resistance is believed to be intense itself.
Okay, so connecting all the dots. What's the ultimate payoff here? For the person doing this intense work, the source seems to link this specific kind of prayer intense, persistent directly to a guaranteed spiritual effect. What's the promise?
Well, the conclusion ties it all back to Scripture, specifically James 5.16, and it often uses the Amplified Translation to really emphasize the effort-result connection.
What does that translation say?
The source quotes this specific phrasing: "The earnest, heartfelt, continued prayer of a righteous man makes tremendous power available, dynamic in its working."
Ah, earnest, heartfelt, continued. Those words echo the travail. And tremendous power available, dynamic in its working. So the source is basically saying, do this kind of prayer and this power will be released. It's almost presented as a spiritual mechanism.
That is the ultimate promise of this teaching, yes. That these sustained, heartfelt, intercessory prayers will make the necessary power available for salvation. The travail isn't just showing you care. It's positioned as the spiritual engine that releases the specific dynamic energy needed to bring about the result you're declaring.
Wow. Okay, that brings us full circle then. A really powerful, if demanding, teaching. We started with the why, the idea of minds being actively blinded. Then the motivation, the incredible worth of a soul, using that striking pearl analogy, selling everything.
The total value.
Then the action itself, this deep travail, the groaning, the wailing, pressing on until that specific release. And finally, the promised result. This dynamic power, unlocked and made available for salvation directly through this method.
It really does force you to think about that connection between perceived value and the effort you're willing to expend, doesn't it? We saw the source define a soul's value as being worth.
Yeah.
Well, everything you have, selling all your possessions, comfort, resources.
Yeah.
So if something is defined as having that supreme value, it really poses a challenging question for you, the listener, to consider. What level of effort persistence, what level of travail, both physical and spiritual, does that imply is necessary to acquire it? The teaching essentially argues the effort must match the price.
That is definitely a potent thought to leave things on. Making that connection between how much we value something and the sheer cost, the persistence we're willing to pour into it, whether that's a spiritual goal, like we discussed, or really any deeply held value in life. This deep dive certainly shows one perspective on the mechanics of persistent, focused effort. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into focused spiritual persistence.
For more information on how you can grow spiritually using Rhapsody of Realities, please visit our website, www.rhapsodyofrealities.org, or you can also visit rin.rhapsodyofrealities.org/salvation. Thank you.